Hello guys, Dr. Spooks here. If you enjoy my videos, please click the like button. It's the only way YouTube's algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. I was 16, a city kid from Chicago, but my family had roots in Alabama. They owned a large farm and some land in Huntsville. My uncle had a big house there and several trailers in the woods for hunting and camping. During a visit, my southern cousins suggested we camp out there. We gathered food, prepared some livestock, and packed for a few days in the wilderness. Upon arrival, the air had a peculiar electric smell, like ozone before a storm. We shrugged it off, unpacked, and headed to a creek for a swim. Suddenly, an older man and a teenager holding a shotgun emerged from the bushes. They inquired about our activities. We mentioned my uncle, whom they knew, and our camping plans. The man warned us to be cautious due to a large animal sighting in the area. His son, about my age, asked to join us, and we agreed. So we end up playing football. Playing around with me, there's the kid Tanner, 5 of my cousins, and then 4 of their friends. In total, there were 5 girls and 6 boys. We all were around 15, 17. We ended up just playing the day away. So we headed back to the camp and pulled out some stuff for a campfire, even though the trailers both had kitchenettes. Tanner says that his family's property sits up against my uncle's. He wants to run home and ask his dad if he can come out camping with us. My cousin Rooster says he's going to go with him since it's going to get dark soon. One of the girls also wants to tag along. It's about 7 o'clock, and it's starting to get pretty dark. They take flashlights and take the trail toward Tan's property. The rest of us chill. We make s'mores and drink. About 30 or 40 minutes later, there's the smell of ozone again. You could smell it over the smell of the fire we had started. This really nasty, coppery smell, like right after you've had a nosebleed and it's stopped. It wasn't exactly like dried blood, but it was that nasty metallic back of your throat smell. We immediately think that it's some kind of electrical malfunction or someone left a hot plate on or some stuff. We search the trailers and nothing is on, and we can all smell it. All of a sudden, we can hear people booking down the path toward us, and Rooster, Tan, and the girl all come running into the clearing, out of breath. And they don't even break stride. They all run into the trailer, right by where the fire is. We all get the hell out of there and into the trailer. They end up calming down. Even Rooster is crying his eyes out at this point. All the while, the fire is guttering lower and lower. So my other cousins say screw it, and are about to go outside to get the generator out of a shed between the trailers. Tanner goes, "Fudge no, lock the front door, ain't nobody else going outside." He's been crying too, and his eyes are bloodshot and puffy, and his pants are dirty as hell. He goes on to tell us that they went up to his house. His father said sure he could go out camping, but to make sure they were careful on the way back, and that maybe they should take one of the hunting rifles just in case. Evidently, Tanner had seen something in their yard a few days before. One of their pigs had come up, ripped up and half-eaten. They assumed it was just some big cats or coyotes, even though they don't usually mess with live animals. He had gone upstairs and packed his stuff and told his dad they would be okay without the rifle because coyotes avoid people. So they started walking back toward where we were camping. So Rooster finally stopped crying and shaking. The girl already had. But she was just staring out the window with a stunned look on her face. He says they had gotten halfway into the woods toward the camp when they started to hear stuff in the forest. It was almost pitch black by this time, so they weren't sure at first what the hell it was. The girl says that she heard something in the bushes right off the trail, and they all beamed their flashlights over there, and there was someone standing back in the woods in a little hollow. Rooster said they shouted at him and told him that he was scaring the fudge out of them and what a prick he was. He says that's when he realized that the guy was facing away from them. So they keep walking, and they start smelling the nasty, coppery ozone smell. They say that they look off into the forest on the opposite side, and it's a dude standing in the forest. backwards slightly closer to the path. So now they start power walking, and Tan keeps going. I should have taken the rifle. As they're telling the story, the smell is still super strong even inside the cabin. They say that after they started walking faster, a kind of low gibbering had started coming from both sides of the wood. As they started booking it back to the trailer, the girl said she had flashed her flashlight out into the woods to the side of them and had seen something jerking itself through the woods. The gibbering just got louder and louder, and when they could see the light from our campfire, something had come out of the woods about 40 yards behind them onto the track, and they had just flat out run as hard as they could to the trailer. So we're out in the woods, and we're assuming at this point it's some rednecks or some stuff trying to mess with us. All of a sudden, my other cousin, Junior, starts going on about how he went to school with a native kid who was telling him about the goat man or some stuff. We promptly tell him to shut the fudge up because we don't need any spooky talk right now. But he just keeps going on and on about how it's the goat man and how we're in his woods and blah, blah, blah. Now, at the time, I had never heard of this goat man or any of that. But then a couple years ago, the year before I graduated from college, I had a native for a roommate, and I ended up asking him about it. And to sum it up, it's basically a man with the head of a goat, and he can shapeshift and get among groups of people to terrorize them. It's also supposed to be kind of like the Wendigo, and it's bad mojo to even talk about it, and even worse if you see it. Keep in mind, I didn't know this back when I was 16. So my cousin is going, the goat man's going to get in and get us. The girls are all terrified, and my cousins and I are all trying to figure out if it's just some hillbillies or if it's some animal. So all of a sudden the smell just goes away. Like to this day, I haven't even experienced anything like it. Like usually smells fade away or lessen. It just literally was there 1 second, and then not the second. So it's after an hour, making it around 9 or 10. We've stopped panicking enough to go back outside and stoke the fire again. We figure it was just some creeps trying to mess with us so we don't go back home, because we think if we do, they'll chase us through the woods or some crazy stuff. Nothing else weird happened that night. We stayed another night, and for the main part of the second night, nothing happens. Then at about 1 a.m, we're outside getting drunk and telling ghost stories. As someone is finishing some spooky story. I don't remember what about. The smell comes back. It's so freaking strong that one of the girls literally starts vomiting. I stand up and you can actually feel how clammy the air is. I say we should get inside and this isn't right. We should have just left. We all go back inside and we're standing around. My cousin just keeps going on about how it's the goat man, and my cousin Rooster tries to shut him up. And all the while, I'm just feeling that something is wrong, and I can't figure out what the hell it is. We end up sitting in there for a while. The smell is just as strong, and we're terrified and all huddled in this camper. We end up cooking brats for everybody because nobody wants to go outside. It's one of those packs with 4 brats. We have a total of 3 packs. I grill them up on the stove and give everybody a hot dog. I get mine. After a while, one of my cousins gets up and goes over to the pot to get another one. He starts grumbling about how I get 2 brats and everybody else only got 1, and I look at him like he's stupid. I tell him that everybody only got 1 because there were only 12 brats, and if he wants more, he should open up a new pack and cook some more. That's when the girl that had been out with Rooster and Tan just starts screaming, "Oh Jesus, oh Lord, get it out." She's crying and shivering, and then it dawns on the cousin standing up to what the hell is wrong. Me and him both glance around the room, and then I feel my heart sink. I run the hell out of the cabin, and the girl runs out with us. The trailer door is banging against the side of the trailer as everybody books out of the cabin. One of my cousin's friends asked us what the fudge was wrong. I start counting us. There's only 11 of us now. I shit you not, my cousin verified. There had been 12 people in the cabin, but being that everybody didn't really know each other well, nobody had really noticed the whole freaking time that there was an extra person. And then I realized earlier that I had kind of noticed something was off. You know how when you're just playing around and having a good time, you don't sweat the smallest stuff, and you don't always keep track of certain stuff? I'm dead sure that someone else had been in the trailer with us, and that they had been there for at least a whole day, eating with us. What makes it worse is that I couldn't figure out which one, because I don't think anyone ever actually interacted with the other person / the goat man. The girl kept praying to Jesus, and we're all sitting outside. Eventually, we get big-ass sticks and go back in the cabin, but there's nobody in there. We count again, and there's 11 people. We go back into the trailer and lock the door. We explain what the hell happened, and the girl says that she realized too, and that when she was about to say something, the person sitting next to her had grabbed her leg hard, leaned over toward her, and said something she couldn't understand. So we are pretty much scared as hell as we huddle together, and I fall asleep. When I wake up, the sun is just coming up, and half the people are asleep and the other half are packing our stuff up. We all want to walk back home, but like 4 people want to stay until the sun is all the way up. And some people think that we're just fudging around and still want to stay at the trailers. I just want to get the hell out of the woods. The girl's name was Kira, the one that the goat man had touched. Anyway, I asked her if she really thought it was something bad, and she said she just wanted to go home, and she doesn't want to be out in the woods alone for another night. So we decide to split up. The 4 that want to go can go, but I have to stay because I have the keys to the cabin, and it's my uncle's, and I have to lock up. I'm super pissed at this point because I feel like people aren't taking this stuff seriously, and I definitely didn't want to be out in the woods for another night. I spend the rest of the day trying to convince the rest of the people, now 4 girls and 4 guys, to get the fudge out of Dodge. Tanner leaves with them to go get a rifle and says he's going to be back. So there are just 7 of us left by 4 p.m. At around 5 p.m. he hadn't made it back yet, and we were getting extremely antsy, and the only reason I stopped begging them to go back was because he went to get a gun. It's about 5:30 p.m. or so when the one cousin that did stay says that the girl Kira is outside. We all look outside, and sure enough, she's standing by the fire pit with her back to the cabin. I'm thinking to myself, if she was so freaking scared, why the hell would she come back? And then I get this nasty feeling in my gut. Keep in mind, the whole time the coppery smell has been gone. Now I realize I can smell just a twinge of it. I say this to the rest of them and everybody, and these are the people that wanted to stay in the freaking woods after we had the damn goat man in our midst, is laughing at me and asking if I set this up to scare them. I'm looking at them like, I'm not bullshitting you at all right now. I ask them why the fudge would I play like that. So one of the girls goes outside to get Kira. She gets halfway to her and stops cold. Kira starts heaving. I don't know how the hell to describe it. Sort of like if someone with their back turned was laughing without actually making any sound. It was this fact that made me realize there was not a freaking sound in the whole woods. It was dead silent. This was like later in September, so it was still fairly hot at the time. But it was super chilly some days too. And you could usually hear geese honking or some kind of birds or squirrels chit-chatting. So I step out the door and tell her to come back in the freaking trailer, right damn now. She backs up into the trailer and we lock the door. We pull down all the shades except one and put a guy there in a chair to watch her. She stands there for another 20 minutes or so. The guy turns to say that she's still there. And then there's a huge bang on the door. We all jump up and scramble around the living room of the trailer. The banging is super loud. So now my cousin is holding one of the girls, and the other 2 are kind of giggling with nervous laughter, and me and the other 2 guys are pale with fear. Then we hear Tan. He's screaming, "Let me in, stop playing." So we go over to the door and open it, and he stumbles in with a rifle. There's nobody else outside. Evidently he had walked up to the campsite. Nothing weird happened in the forest, but he had seen a girl. Mind you, he said it was not Kira standing there. When he had gotten to the edge of the clearing, she had turned toward him with a slack-jawed look and just stared him down, slowly tracking him as he walked around the outside of the clearing towards the camp. He said it wasn't till he was almost halfway to the trailer he realized that she was getting closer to him. She had started off by the fire, and without him even seeing her move, she had been turning, inching closer. He said he just ran the rest of the way back to the cabin thinking it would open. And when he got to the door and it was locked, he turned and it was about half the distance to the door. He looks around the room and then gets super pale. He pulls me to the side and whispers in my ear, "You know there are only 7 of us in here, right?" I get that feeling where your stomach drops to your knees. It had been back inside the trailer while we were sorting out who was going where. And then when we all went outside to talk earlier in the day, it has just slipped right back in. We looked out the window and there was nobody out there. So we recount everyone, and then basically I go over and ask everyone how many people were here earlier. And everybody says 8. I say, "Well, how many are here now?" They all do the count and then realize there are only 7 people in the cabin now. So Ton had brought back a couple of boxes of ammo and his rifle. He had told his dad that there was some kind of animal in the forest because he didn't think his dad would believe him if he said it was Goatman. He says that his cousin is supposed to be coming down in a few hours, and that in the morning we can all go back to his place and his cousin will drive us home. Now I'm really terrified, but I at least feel better because we can be American and shoot the fudge out of whatever it is if it comes back. But then my cousin gets into this huge argument with one of the girls because she thinks that I'm trying to be funny and prank them, and that she's getting really scared, and that I'm not funny. He keeps telling her I'm not that kind of person, and she says, "Well, how do we know the girl wasn't just Tanner in a wig? Or if it's really the Goatman, how do we know that this is the real Tanner and that Goatman just didn't kill Tanner in the woods and take his gun?" So we get into a huge argument about this, where me and Tan are like, we could seriously be in danger because at the very least, someone has been sneaking themselves into our trailer without us knowing and mingling with us. And at worst, something bad is in the forest messing with us. One of the girls is crying and saying she wants to go right now, and we're trying to tell her we shouldn't because none of us are walking through the woods in the middle of the night. At this point, the sun is starting to go down and it's getting a little cloudy out. We eat something and turn on the radio for a while, but we can't really get a station out there with anything decent. So we turn it off at about the time that Tan's cousin shows up. He was like 19, I think. At this point, the sun is just barely over the horizon, and he has one of those heavy-duty lantern flashlights and another rifle. He walks up to the trailer, and we whisper to Tan, asking if he's sure that's his cousin, and he says yes. The guy looks behind him and all around the camp, then walks in. He kind of glances at all of us and looks a little confused. He says, "Where's your other little buddy at? I figured she would meet me up at the cabin. Is she a little slow or something?" He also asked whether we had been cooking blood in the cabin because it smelled like blood and hot pans all the way up the trail. We are all like, nope. But we ask him what the hell he's talking about with the girl he saw. He had come down the same trail Tan had been using, and he had come up on one of you guys' buddies, standing in the middle of the trail, looking at him slack-jawed. He had asked her a bunch of questions, but all she did was just look at him. Then she smiled at him, and he said he kept walking. She couldn't seem to keep up with him and kept lagging a little behind him. He said he asked her if she was hurt or something, and if she needed any help, but she had continued to stare. Eventually, he had been walking and turned around a bend in the trail. But when he turned around and went back to see if she was okay, the trail was empty. He'd assumed she had taken some shortcut through the woods to our trailer. We tell him the whole story of what's been going on. I half expected him to say we were full of stuff, but he just listened and then sat down on the couches in the living room. Tanner's cousin gets back to the girl. He said that when she had kept trying to lag behind him, it had kind of weirded him out, so he tried to keep her in front of him, but no matter how slow he walked, she was always lagging a little behind, and he smelled this nasty smell, and it got stronger as he got to the camp. Eventually, it got really strong. She had said something really low that he didn't catch, and when he had turned around, she had been right the fudge up on him, and he stepped back from her. It was at this point he asked her if she was okay, and if she wasn't, him to carry her back the rest of the way, and she just kept staring. He said he reached out for her, as in to grab her on the shoulder, but he must have misjudged the distance because she was off to the side of where he had put his hand, like she had moved while he was looking dead at her. So at this point, we know this stuff's real unless Tan is playing a joke, which we can tell he's not because he's almost pissing his pants. So they load up their rifles, we eat some more, and we just kind of sit around until about 11. To this day, every time I think about this, I really pray to God that it's some huge prank that my cousins played on me and just never revealed, so I would be scared for the rest of my life. At round 11, the stink of copper turns into an actual nasty, gross, blood-like smell, like cooking blood and singed hair. Tan and his cousin Reese get up instantly and grab the rifles. There's like a half-knocking, half-clawing at the door, and I kid you not, there's this voice. And it sounds like when you see those YouTube cats and dogs whose owners teach them how to talk. It says in this halting, weirdly toned voice, "Let me in, stop playing." It made my nuts shrivel up against my body, and one of the girls just started crying and calling on Jesus. It was so obviously not a person talking. It didn't have the right cadence, and that's some stuff that I never realized until that moment. But all people have a certain cadence when they talk, no matter what language. All people have a certain kind of rhythm to talking. This thing didn't have any kind of cadence or rhythm. One of those YouTube cats, that's what it sounded like outside the door. So now I'm in full-on terror mode. We keep yelling outside, "Who is it? Stop messing around, man." And it just keeps saying, "In," or "Let me in," for almost 15 minutes. It sounded extremely creepy. Sorry for being on a tangent, but if you can't imagine how this stuff sounded, then you can't imagine how messed up the whole situation was. So then the smell goes away for a while, and for the next hour or so you can hear someone basically creeping around in the woods and stuff. Every couple of minutes it'll come back to the door and say something. Finally, when the smell fades away, it's around 2 in the morning right now. Reese says, "Man, screw this," and opens the door and walks outside with his rifle. He fires a shot into the air and says something to the effect of, "In the name of Jesus Christ, go away." He fires 2 more times, and then from the woods, right up against the river across from the trailer, it sounds like something is slowly gibbering and hooting. Then it starts screaming, and it sounds almost like a woman and a cat in a bag screaming together. Like, I seriously have never heard any stuff like that, and you can hear the brush over that way start to shake. Reese fires over into the tree line and then starts backing into the house. We lock the door, and we can hear this stuff keening and screaming. Reese says something had come out of the bushes, super low to the ground and crawling toward the cabin. He had shot at it. Pretty much that was how the rest of the night went. It was literally screaming constantly for the next 2 hours, and we could hear stuff moving out into the tree line. But it never came back up to the cabin until everyone had finally fallen asleep. Tan had been sitting in the chair watching the door with his rifle. Nobody else heard or saw this, and he told me 2 days later after the whole thing was over. He said he had been nodding off after the screaming and noises finally stopped. He had been almost asleep when he saw someone come out of the bathroom and then lay down in the middle of the floor and go to sleep. He just assumed it was one of us and he had nodded off. Then he said he kind of realized something was wrong, and while pretending to be sleeping, he counted us. There were 9 people in the cabin. He basically didn't want to try to shoot at the thing in the cabin and have it kill us all then and there, or have Reese wake up and start shooting and then we kill ourselves. So he just stayed awake all night pretending to be asleep. He said sometimes it would stand up and kind of do this weird jittery thing or heave like it was laughing, but then it would lay back down. We woke up, and I noticed that Tan was a little jittery and that he was avoiding looking at all of us. But we ate some breakfast, packed up, and started walking to his house. He stayed last in the cabin and said he'd lock up and bring me my uncle's keys to just start walking and he'd catch up, which I didn't really want to do. We got a little bit up the path, and when he came running up, basically we just jogged back to his house. His cousin took us home. There was a window in the bathroom. Tan had gone back to lock up and looked in there. We were too stupid to lock a screenless window. The window was open when he went in there. I'm guessing it had been doing that all along, waiting for us to fall asleep or slip up and then getting in among us. It walked with us all the damn way back to his house, and then he said it lagged to the back of the group and looked him dead in the eyes before walking into the woods. I decided to camp in Yellowstone National Park because I wanted to reconnect with nature and escape the suffocating grind of city life. The idea had been brewing in my mind for months, and as someone who rarely did anything adventurous nowadays, I finally convinced myself that a solo camping trip would be the perfect way to find some peace. The drive to Yellowstone was long but stunning. Mountains rose like giants on the horizon, and dense forests stretched endlessly on either side of the road. When I reached the park entrance, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Yellowstone's vast wilderness was both beautiful and intimidating. I chose a remote campsite, far from the main areas. I didn't want to be near the tourists or crowded spots. I wanted solitude. After a ranger gave me a map and a few safety warnings about wildlife, I drove deep into the park following a narrow dirt road until I found the clearing that would be my campsite for the weekend. The area was perfect. Tall pine trees surrounded the clearing, their tops swaying gently in the breeze. A small stream trickled nearby, and the ground was soft with moss. I pitched my tent, set up my small camping stove, and settled in for the evening. The first night was uneventful, almost peaceful. The distant sounds of crickets and the occasional howl of wolves added to the charm of being in the wilderness. As I lay in my tent, looking up at the stars through the small mesh window, I felt like I had made the right choice. The next morning I explored the nearby trails, taking pictures of the breathtaking scenery. The smell of pine filled the air, and the gentle sound of the stream was like a soothing melody. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather and the wind picked up. I decided to head back to my campsite before it got dark. As I walked back, I noticed something strange near the trail. A patch of grass flattened as if something heavy had been lying there. Nearby, I found claw marks etched deep into the bark of a tree. The marks were unnerving. They were too large to be from a bear, and the grooves were deep, as if whatever made them had immense strength. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably an animal passing through. After all, this was Yellowstone. Wild animals were part of the deal. That night, the atmosphere felt different. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an eerie, oppressive silence. I sat by my campfire, eating a can of beans, trying to shake off the growing unease. Then I heard it. A low growl, faint but unmistakable, came from somewhere in the trees. My heart stopped and I froze, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. Probably a wolf, I muttered to myself, though my voice trembled. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Whatever it was large, and it was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but I saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I backed into my tent, zipping it shut and clutching my small camping knife. It was a pathetic defense, but it was all I had. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint movements outside. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, heavy breathing. When dawn finally broke, I unzipped my tent cautiously. The clearing was empty, but something was off. The fire pit had been disturbed, and claw marks gouged the ground around it. I knew I should leave. Every instinct told me to pack up and go, but my stubbornness, or maybe my pride, kept me there. I told myself it was just a bear or some other animal curious about the fire, but deep down, I knew this was different. The day passed uneventfully, though the unease lingered. I spent most of it near the campsite, too nervous to venture far. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I gathered as much firewood as I could, determined to keep the fire burning all night. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to come alive. The silence was replaced by faint, distant sounds, howls, growls, and something else, almost like a deep, guttural snarl. I sat close to the fire, clutching my flashlight, scanning the tree line. Then I saw it. Two glowing eyes, yellow and piercing, stared at me from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The eyes didn't move, they just watched me, unblinking. Then slowly a figure stepped into the firelight. It was massive, standing on two legs like a man but covered in thick, dark fur. Its head was unmistakably canine, long snout, sharp teeth glinting in the firelight. But its body was muscular and humanoid. Its clawed hands hung by its sides, and its chest rose and fell with each deep breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The creature let out a low, menacing growl, baring its teeth. Then it dropped to all fours and charged. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran, sprinting into the woods as fast as my legs could carry me. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly, illuminating only fragments of the trees ahead. Behind me, I heard the creature crashing through the underbrush, its snarls echoing through the forest. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't dare stop. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the darkness disorienting me. Then suddenly the ground disappeared beneath me. I tumbled down a slope, rolling and crashing through bushes and debris before landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through my shoulder and I bit back a scream. For a moment everything was silent. I lay there gasping for breath, my body trembling. Then I heard it. The creature was at the top of the slope, its glowing eyes scanning the darkness. It let out a howl, a bone-chilling sound that made my blood run cold. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and ran deeper into the forest. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin. Its windows were broken, and the door hung loosely on its hinges, but it was shelter. I rushed inside, slamming the door shut and pushing a heavy wooden table against it. My flashlight flickered, its battery dying, leaving me in near darkness. The cabin smelled of mildew and decay, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I found an old hunting rifle propped against the wall, but when I checked, it was empty. No ammunition. Outside, the forest had gone silent again, but I knew it was out there. Minutes passed like hours as I crouched in the corner, gripping the useless rifle. Then I heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps circling the cabin. The creature was toying with me, letting me know it was there. Its claws scraped against the walls, and its guttural growl rumbled through the thin wooden planks. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find a way in. The cabin was my only defense, but it felt like a flimsy shield against the terror outside. The creature prowled around the perimeter, its heavy footsteps crunching through the dirt. Occasionally, it would let out a deep growl, the sound reverberating through the cabin walls. I crouched in the corner, clutching the rifle like it might offer some protection. I kept my flashlight off to avoid drawing attention, though the darkness made my imagination run wild. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like it was already inside with me. Then came the scratching. The creature dragged its claws along the side of the cabin, the sound sharp and grating. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it was testing the structure. I gritted my teeth, trying to stay quiet, but my breathing was too loud, too erratic. I pressed a hand over my mouth, praying it couldn't hear me. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. I dared to hope it had given up. But then, with a deafening crash, the creature slammed against the door. The entire cabin shook, and the table I had pushed against the door groaned under the impact. "No, no, no," I muttered, my voice trembling. It slammed again, harder this time. The door wouldn't hold much longer. I knew I couldn't stay. The cabin would soon be nothing more than splinters. My only chance was to run again. I scanned the room in desperation and spotted a small broken window near the back. It was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, but it was my only option. As the creature threw itself against the door again, I climbed onto the table below the window, wincing as the old wood creaked under my weight. I pushed the jagged glass out of the frame, cutting my hands in the process, but I didn't care. The door cracked, splinters flying into the room. I could hear the creature's guttural breathing, so close now. With one final push, I wriggled through the window, landing awkwardly on the ground outside. My ankle twisted painfully, but I forced myself to get up and run. The creature roared, a sound of pure rage, and I heard it crash through the cabin, tearing apart what was left of the structure. I didn't look back. The forest was an endless maze, each shadow a potential hiding spot for the creature. The moonlight barely filtered through the thick canopy, and my flashlight had died completely. I stumbled blindly, relying on instinct more than sight. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the trees. Its pace was relentless, its snarls growing louder with every passing second. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but fear pushed me forward. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. Then in the distance, I saw a faint glow. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, my mind playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, the glow grew brighter. It was a fire, a large one. I stumbled into a clearing and saw a group of people, campers. There were 3 of them, sitting around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. They turned toward me, startled. "There's something in the woods," I gasped, collapsing to my knees. Before they could respond, the creature burst into the clearing. The campers froze, their faces a mix of confusion and fear, as they took in the massive, snarling beast. "What the hell is that?" one of them shouted, scrambling to his feet. The creature roared, its eyes glowing with fury. It lunged toward the group, moving with terrifying speed. One of the campers tried to fight back, swinging a heavy branch at the creature. It swatted him aside like he was nothing, sending him flying into the fire. The other 2 ran, their screams echoing through the clearing. The creature chased them, its powerful strides making the ground tremble. I watched in horror, too terrified to move. The firelight cast monstrous shadows of the beast as it hunted the campers, their cries fading into the distance. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I forced myself to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. I had to keep moving. I had to find help. The sounds of the creature's hunt grew fainter as I stumbled through the forest, though the feeling of being watched never left me. Then finally, I saw them, flashlights bobbing in the distance, accompanied by the faint sound of voices. "Rangers!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "Help me!" The lights turned toward me, and moments later, 2 park rangers emerged from the trees, their rifles drawn. "What's going on?" one of them asked, his eyes scanning the darkness. "There's something out there," I stammered, clutching my side. "It's killing people." The rangers exchanged a look, their faces grim. "Let's get you out of here," one of them said, motioning for me to follow. As they led me back toward safety, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The forest seemed to close in behind us, the shadows deep and impenetrable. But just before we reached the edge of the woods, I saw them. 2 glowing yellow eyes watching us from the darkness. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Even as the rangers got me to their truck and drove me out of the park, I knew the creature was still out there, watching, waiting, and I knew it wasn't over. It would hunt again. But I didn't care because I was going home. I felt guilty about the campers, which is why I'm sharing my story online so people stay away from Yellowstone National Park. If you absolutely have to go, don't go alone or unarmed. You have been warned. It all started with a decision I regret more than anything. I was driving home late at night after visiting my parents. They live in a small, quiet town about 3 hours from the city. The visit had run longer than expected, and by the time I got on the road, the sky was pitch black. I was tired, and the thought of driving the usual route with its long stretches of highway and boring scenery felt unbearable. That's when I remembered a shortcut, a winding road that cut through the forest. It would save me about 30 minutes, and I'd driven it before during the day. But driving through the woods at night, that was new. The trees loomed tall on either side of the road, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating only the gravel road and the occasional reflective glint of an animal's eyes in the distance. It was unsettling, but manageable at first. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something strange. The woods were too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, not even the distant hoot of an owl. Just the hum of my car engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Then I saw it. At first it was just a blur in my peripheral vision, a shadow darting between the trees. I slowed down, thinking it might be a deer, but when I scanned the woods with my headlights, I saw nothing. I shook it off. The woods play tricks on your mind at night, I told myself. Probably just a raccoon or something. But a few minutes later I saw it again. This time it was closer. The figure was tall, much taller than any person, with a hunched posture and long limbs. Its fur was dark and matted, blending into the shadows of the trees. But the most unsettling part was its face, elongated like a wolf's, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Then it disappeared into the woods faster than I thought anything that size could move. I pressed down on the gas pedal, my heart racing. The shortcut suddenly didn't seem like a good idea anymore. I just wanted to get out of the woods as quickly as possible. But as I rounded a bend, I saw it again, this time standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just a few feet away from the creature. It was even larger than I'd thought, towering over the hood of my car. Its long, clawed hands hung by its sides, and its head tilted as it stared at me, almost as if it were curious. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching as I backed away. The creature let out a guttural growl, deep and menacing, before dropping onto all fours and sprinting toward me. It was fast, too fast. I floored the gas pedal, turning the car around as quickly as I could. The engine roared as I sped down the road, but no matter how fast I went, I could still see the creature in my rearview mirror, its glowing eyes locked on me. The road twisted and turned, the trees flashing by in a blur as I struggled to keep control of the car. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The creature was relentless, its massive body moving with an unnatural speed and grace. At one point, it leaped onto the road behind me, its claws scraping against the asphalt as it gained ground. I tried everything, zigzagging, speeding up, even turning off my headlights for a brief moment in the hope it might lose sight of me. But nothing worked. Then, as I rounded another bend, I saw a narrow path branching off from the main road. It wasn't marked, and I had no idea where it led, but I didn't care. I veered onto it, my car bouncing violently over the uneven ground. The creature didn't follow immediately. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought I'd lost it. But then I heard it, a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of branches snapping and leaves rustling. It was still hunting me. The path was rough and overgrown, and it was taking a toll on my car. The suspension groaned with every bump, and I could hear the occasional scrape of branches against the undercarriage, but I didn't dare stop. Then the engine sputtered. No, 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 I muttered, panic setting in. I pressed down on the gas, but the car barely responded. Finally, it came to a complete stop, the engine dying with a pathetic whine. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, too scared to move. The woods were silent again, but I knew it was out there, waiting. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. The call wouldn't go through, no signal. Of course, that's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I locked the doors and crouched down in my seat, praying it wouldn't find me. But as the footsteps grew louder, I knew it was only a matter of time. Then came the scratching. It started at the back of the car, a faint scraping sound that quickly grew louder as the creature moved toward the driver's side. The scratching stopped just as it reached the driver's side door. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was sure the creature could hear it. I didn't dare look out the window. I was too afraid of what I might see, but I could feel its presence, an oppressive, suffocating weight pressing against the car. Then slowly the creature began to circle. I heard its claws scrape against the metal, its guttural breathing vibrating through the air. It stopped near the hood of the car, and I felt a shudder as something heavy pressed down on it. I risked a glance, just for a second. The creature was perched on the hood, its glowing eyes staring straight at me through the windshield. Its face was even more terrifying up close, canine in shape, but with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. It tilted its head, its lips pulling back in what looked like a sinister grin, revealing sharp, glistening teeth. My entire body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare back at it, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything. Then it raised a clawed hand and slammed it against the windshield. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing under the force of the blow. That was enough to jolt me into action. I threw open the car door and bolted into the woods, my feet pounding against the uneven ground. Branches whipped at my face and arms as I ran blindly, the darkness swallowing me whole. Behind me, I heard the creature leap off the car and let out a deafening howl. The sound spurred me on, adrenaline fueling my every step. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The forest seemed endless, the trees blending together in a chaotic maze. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my lungs burning as I struggled to catch my breath. Then I tripped. My foot caught on something, and I went sprawling to the ground, pain shooting through my ankle. I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I heard it. Heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. I pressed myself against the ground, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was hammering so loudly that I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. I held my breath, too terrified to move. The creature was so close I could hear its breathing, deep, raspy, and uneven. It sniffed the air, its claws scratching against the ground as it moved. I dared to peek through the underbrush. The creature was pacing, its glowing eyes scanning the forest. It was searching for me. For a brief moment, I thought I might actually have a chance. If I stayed still, maybe it would lose interest and leave. But then it turned its head sharply, its ears twitching. It had found me. With a guttural growl, it lunged toward me, its massive frame crashing through the bushes. I rolled to the side just in time, its claws raking the ground where I had been lying. I scrambled to my feet and ran, ignoring the pain in my ankle. The creature was right behind me, its growls growing louder with every step. My vision blurred with tears and sweat, but I pushed forward, my mind consumed with one thought: survive. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw it, a faint light cutting through the darkness. At first I thought it was my imagination, a cruel trick of the mind. But as I got closer, the light grew brighter. Voices, I heard voices. "Over here," I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Help me." The light swung toward me and I saw them, 2 men in ranger uniforms holding flashlights and rifles. "What the hell?" one of them started. but his words were cut off by the sound of the creature barreling toward us. "Get behind us," the other ranger yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. I stumbled toward them, collapsing to the ground as they raised their rifles. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive frame illuminated by the flashlights. It let out a deafening roar, its yellow eyes locked on us. "Jesus Christ," one of the rangers muttered. "What is that thing?" They opened fire, the gunshots echoing through the forest. The creature recoiled, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out an ear-piercing screech and retreated into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The rangers helped me to my feet, their faces pale and drawn. "What the hell was that?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. I didn't know how to answer. It followed me," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. They didn't press me for details. Instead, they led me back to their truck, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. As we drove back to their station, I stared out the window, half expecting to see those glowing yellow eyes watching us from the trees. The rangers dropped me off at a hospital where I was treated for exhaustion and a sprained ankle. They promised to investigate. It's been weeks since that night, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that it's not over. Every time I close my eyes, I see its face. Every time I hear a rustle in the bushes or a strange noise in the distance, my heart skips a beat. I don't take shortcuts anymore. I don't drive through the woods. But sometimes late at night I hear something outside my window, a faint scratching sound almost too quiet to notice. And I wonder if it's still hunting me. It was early March, just after my 21st birthday, when I decided it was time to embark on a personal rite of passage. I had been yearning for solitude and a chance to test myself against the elements. After weeks of persuading my parents, my mother being the most reluctant, they finally agreed to let me spend 2 weeks alone at our family cabin, nestled deep in the Canadian Rockies. Our family had always been connected to the outdoors. Weekends were filled with camping trips, hiking expeditions, and fishing adventures. My siblings and I were adept at hunting and living off the land. Survival skills were second nature to us. However, since the unexpected passing of my uncle in a hiking accident, my mother's concern for our safety had intensified. As I drove up the winding mountain road, the towering pines and crisp mountain air filled me with a sense of freedom. My phone buzzed, a call from my older brother Michael. It was likely the last call I'd received before losing service in this remote area. "Hey Liam, just wanted to catch you before you're off the grid." His voice crackled slightly. "Hey Mike, just enjoying the drive, what's up?" "Nothing much. Mom's been a bit anxious, you know how she gets, just promise to stay safe, okay?" I chuckled. "Always do, tell her not to worry. I'll be back before she knows it." "All right, take care, bro, and remember, if you decide to stay longer, make sure to come down and let us know." "Will do." The call dropped as the signal faded. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, embracing the thought of being disconnected for a while. The mountains loomed ahead, their snow-capped peaks piercing the clear blue sky. This was going to be a memorable 2 weeks. The cabin came into view, a rustic wooden structure that had been in our family for generations. It sat beside a tranquil lake, surrounded by dense forest. Inside it was cozy and functional. A small kitchen, a living area with a stone fireplace, and 2 bedrooms. The solar panels provided electricity, but there was no phone or internet service. After unloading my gear, I took a moment to soak in the serenity. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake and the distant call of a loon. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The first 3 days were blissful. I spent my time fishing, hiking familiar trails, and reading by the fireplace. The weather was mild for March, and the clear skies promised good conditions for the days ahead. On the 4th day, I decided to go hunting. Early morning light filtered through the trees as I ventured deeper into the forest. After a few hours of tracking, I spotted a majestic elk grazing in a clearing. Holding my breath, I lined up the shot and fired. The elk fell instantly, a clean, humane kill. Approaching the animal, I admired its grandeur. The antlers were impressive, and the meat would sustain me for the rest of my stay. Realizing the elk was too heavy to transport whole, I decided to field dress it on the spot. I propped my rifle against a nearby tree, pulled out my hunting knife, and began the meticulous process. Once I'd prepared a sizable portion to bring back, I cleaned my knife in the snow, stuck it into the tree above my rifle, and headed back to the cabin with the meat. My plan was to start cooking and then return to retrieve the rest. Back at the cabin, I started a fire in the outdoor pit and placed the elk meat over it, seasoning it with herbs I had gathered. The aroma promised a hearty meal. Satisfied, I decided to return to the site to collect more meat while it cooked. As I trekked back, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. The temperature hadn't dropped, but a sense of unease settled over me. I shrugged it off as a random shiver and pressed on. About halfway there, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark figure darting behind a tree. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. Perhaps it was a deer or my imagination playing tricks. Upon reaching the clearing, I froze. The area was pristine, as if untouched. The elk's carcass, the remnants of my field dressing, all gone. Even my knife and rifle were missing from the tree. Panic began to creep in. I scanned the area for any signs, but found none. No footprints, no bloodstains, nothing. I searched frantically, my mind racing. Bears? But they would have left tracks. A poacher? But why erase all signs and take my equipment? The lack of footprints was baffling. The snow was undisturbed except for my own. Heart pounding, I hurried back to the cabin, trying to make sense of the situation. When I arrived, the fire had died down, and the meat I left cooking was nowhere to be found. Confusion turned to dread. Was someone messing with me? That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak and rustle amplified in the silence. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping at the window. I sat up, straining to listen. The tapping continued, irregular and faint. Gripping a flashlight, I approached the window cautiously. Peering through the glass, I saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees. Telling myself it was just a branch in the wind, I returned to bed, though sleep did not come easily. The next morning, I decided to stay close to the cabin. The eerie incidents had unsettled me. I occupied myself by chopping wood and tending to small repairs around the property. As evening approached, I noticed the stack of firewood I'd prepared earlier was missing. Frustration turned to fear. Someone or something was lurking around. Determined to catch the culprit, I decided to set up a simple alarm system using bells and fishing line around the perimeter. Hours passed in silence. Just as I began to doubt myself, the bells jingled softly. Heart racing, I grabbed my rifle and stepped onto the porch. The forest was silent, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. Then, at the edge of the tree line, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing unnaturally still. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its eyes reflected the moonlight with an eerie glow. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The figure tilted its head as if studying me. Before I could react, the figure moved with inhuman speed, disappearing into the forest. Against my better judgment, I gave chase, driven by a mix of fear and determination to uncover the truth. The underbrush seemed to claw at me as I pursued the shadow. The forest grew denser, and the canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight. The figure was always just ahead, slipping between the trees effortlessly. Suddenly, I stumbled into a small clearing illuminated by a shaft of moonlight. The figure stood at the opposite edge, its features now more discernible. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were voids of darkness. It opened its mouth, revealing a row of sharp, jagged teeth. A guttural sound emanated from it, a mix between a growl and a hiss. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as it began to advance toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Snapping out of my trance, I raised the rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the forest, but the creature remained unaffected. It was as if the bullet passed right through it. Realizing the futility, I turned and ran, adrenaline fueling my escape. Branches whipped against my face and the cold air burned my lungs. The creature's pursuit was silent, but I could feel its presence closing in. Bursting through the cabin door, I slammed it shut and bolted it. My heart pounded in my ears as I backed away, eyes fixed on the entrance. Minutes passed in silence. Had I lost it? Suddenly, a slow, deliberate scratching began at the door. The sound was unnerving, like nails on a chalkboard. Then came the whispers, indecipherable but chilling, as if multiple voices were speaking in hushed tones. I searched frantically for anything to barricade the door. Grabbing a heavy bookshelf, I pushed it against the entrance. The scratching intensified, now accompanied by thudding knocks that rattled the hinges. Remembering the emergency flare gun in the supply closet, I armed myself and took a defensive position. The windows rattled as shadows moved outside, darting back and forth. Without warning, the largest window shattered, and the creature began to crawl through the opening. Its movements were disjointed, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Summoning every ounce of courage, I aimed the flare gun and fired. The flare struck the creature, igniting it in a burst of fiery light. It let out a piercing scream that reverberated through the cabin before retreating into the darkness. Silence settled once more, but I knew it was far from over. I secured the broken window as best I could, using furniture and spare wood planks. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. The creatures, there were more than one now, circled the cabin, their whispers and scratches relentless. Exhausted and terrified, I huddled in the corner with the rifle and a hunting knife at the ready. Sleep was impossible. Every so often I thought I saw glowing eyes peering through cracks or heard faint laughter. As dawn approached, the activity outside began to wane. The first rays of sunlight seemed to keep the creatures at bay. Seizing the opportunity, I decided I needed to leave immediately. Gathering essential supplies, I cautiously exited the cabin. The forest was eerily quiet, but the oppressive feeling had lifted slightly. My truck was parked a short distance away. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, I made my way toward it. Just as I reached the vehicle, a shriek pierced the air. One of the creatures emerged from behind a tree, sprinting toward me with alarming speed. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life just as the creature reached the truck. It slammed into the side, leaving a deep dent. I floored the accelerator, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I saw more of them emerging from the forest, their figures becoming smaller as I gained distance. The winding mountain road required all my concentration, but the overwhelming need to escape kept me focused. After what felt like hours, I reached the main highway. The morning sun bathed the landscape in a comforting glow. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. At the local sheriff's office, I recounted my harrowing experience. Sheriff Daniels listened intently, his expression a mix of skepticism and concern. "Son, are you sure about what you saw? These mountains have a way of playing tricks on the mind, especially when you're alone," he said kindly. "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling the truth," I insisted. "Something is out there." He sighed. "I'll send Deputy Harris up to your cabin to check things out. In the meantime, why don't you get some rest?" Feeling dismissed but too exhausted to argue, I agreed. I checked into a motel and collapsed onto the bed, sleep overtaking me almost instantly. I awoke to a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Deputy Harris standing there. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "Sure," I replied, stepping aside. "I went up to your cabin," he began. "Place is a bit of a mess. Broken window, damaged door. But I didn't find any signs of these creatures you mentioned." I frowned. Did you check the woods, look for tracks? He shook his head. Snowfall last night covered any tracks that might have been there. Look, Liam, I'm not saying you didn't experience something, but maybe it was a bear or a mountain lion. Stress and isolation can do strange things to a person. Frustration welled up inside me. I know what I saw. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Get some rest. Maybe take a break from the cabin for a while. After he left, I felt more isolated than ever. Determined to find answers, I headed to the local library. If the authorities wouldn't help, I'd have to figure it out myself. In the dusty archives of the library, I searched for any records of unusual occurrences in the area. Hours passed as I combed through old newspapers, journals, and local folklore books. Finally, I stumbled upon an old legend, a tale of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that haunted the forests, preying on those who showed greed or disturbed the natural balance. Descriptions matched the creatures I had encountered. Gaunt figures, insatiable hunger, and the ability to mimic human voices. Chills ran down my spine as I read accounts from settlers and indigenous peoples alike. Could it be possible that I had crossed paths with such an entity? Despite every instinct telling me to stay away, I knew I had to confront this. I reached out to a local indigenous elder, Joseph Black Elk, whose family had lived in the area for generations. Meeting at his modest home on the reservation, I recounted my experience. He listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing little. When I finished, he nodded slowly. The Wendigo is a powerful spirit, a warning against excess and disrespect for nature, he said. But it is not invincible. What can I do? I asked, desperation evident in my voice. He considered me carefully. You must make amends. Perform a cleansing ritual to restore balance. I will guide you. That evening, we journeyed back to the cabin. Joseph carried a bundle of sacred herbs and tools. The sun was setting as we began the ritual. We lit a fire in the clearing where I had first encountered the creature. Joseph chanted in his native language, the words melodic and soothing. He sprinkled herbs into the flames, the fragrant smoke rising into the twilight sky. Speak from your heart, he instructed. Acknowledge your actions and ask for forgiveness. Taking a deep breath, I spoke aloud. I came here seeking solitude, but may have disrespected the land and its spirits. I ask for forgiveness and pledge to honor the balance of nature. The wind picked up, swirling around us. For a moment I thought I saw shadows moving at the edge of the firelight, but they remained distant. Joseph concluded the ritual with a final chant. The oppressive feeling that had plagued me seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace. Over the next few days, I remained at the cabin under Joseph's guidance. We repaired the damage, cleaned the area where I had field-dressed the elk, and offered prayers of thanks. The forest seemed different now, still wild and mysterious, but less threatening. The creatures did not return, and I felt a renewed connection to the land. Before departing, Joseph left me with words of wisdom. Respect is a two-way path. Honor the spirits, and they will honor you. I returned home with a newfound understanding. My family listened as I recounted everything, their skepticism giving way to concern and then acceptance. Years have passed since that fateful trip. I've continued to explore the wilderness, but always with a deep respect for the natural world and its unseen forces. The cabin remains a cherished family retreat, and I've shared my experience with others, hoping to impart the lessons I learned. Some dismiss it as a tall tale, but those who have felt the profound presence of nature understand. There are mysteries in this world that defy explanation, and perhaps it's better that way. In embracing the unknown, I found not just survival but personal growth. The journey tested me in ways I could never have anticipated, shaping the person I've become. The mountains stand eternal, their peaks touching the heavens, their forests whispering ancient secrets. I often return to that place not with fear but with reverence. My rite of passage was not the adventure I had envisioned, but it was the one I needed. It taught me humility, respect, and the importance of balance. As I gaze upon the rugged landscape, I feel a connection that goes beyond words, a silent understanding between man and nature. Some stories are meant to be shared, not to instill fear, but to inspire respect and wonder. This is mine, and I hope it serves as a reminder to tread lightly, listen deeply, and honor the world we are privileged to inhabit. Being a park ranger in the vast expanse of Redwood National Park was a dream come true for me. The towering trees, the whispering leaves, and the serenity of the wilderness were things I cherished deeply. Every day brought new sights and sounds, a chance to connect with nature in its purest form. But nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited us in those woods. It was late September, and the forest was painted with hues of amber and gold. The tourist season was winding down, and the park was returning to its tranquil state. I was on my usual patrol route, checking the trails and campsites to ensure everything was in order before the colder months set in. As dusk approached, I decided to take a detour along the less-traveled North Ridge Trail. The path was overgrown, and few ventured that way, but it offered a shortcut back to the ranger station. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine was heavy, creating a sense of calm that was almost hypnotic. About halfway down the trail, I noticed something unusual, a backpack lying haphazardly beside the path. Curious, I approached it and called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice echoed, but no reply came. Inspecting the backpack, I found it torn and empty, as if it had been ransacked. A sense of unease settled in my stomach. I radioed back to the station. "This is Ranger Thomas. I found some abandoned gear on North Ridge Trail. Possible lost hiker. Over." Static was my only response. The thick canopy often interfered with the signal, so I wasn't immediately concerned. I marked the location on my map to report it later and decided to continue along the trail. The forest grew denser, and the shadows stretched longer as the sun dipped below the horizon. An unnatural silence enveloped the area. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds. Just the sound of my own footsteps crunching on the underbrush. Then a distant sound pierced the quiet, a faint, agonized scream carried by the wind. I froze, my heart pounding. It sounded human but distorted, filled with pain and despair. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction, but it seemed to echo from all around. "Hello? Is someone out there?" I shouted, but only silence followed. I had to make a decision. Night was falling fast, and searching alone would be risky. I turned back toward the station to get help. As I hurried along the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and every crunch of leaves behind me made me quicken my pace. Finally, the lights of the ranger station came into view. Bursting through the door, I found my colleague Emily poring over some maps. "Emily, we might have a problem," I said, catching my breath. I found a torn backpack on North Ridge Trail and heard a scream. Couldn't reach anyone on the radio. She looked up, concern etched on her face. "I just got a call about a missing camper, a young woman named Jessica. Her friends reported that she went for a walk this afternoon and never returned." A chill ran down my spine. "We need to organize a search party immediately." She nodded. "I'll alert the others and notify the authorities. In the meantime, we should gear up." As we prepared our equipment, another ranger, Mark, rushed in. "Did you guys hear that? It sounded like someone screaming from the east side of the park." Emily and I exchanged worried glances. That was a different area entirely. "That's the second report," I said. "Something's very wrong." Within an hour, a small team was assembled. 4 of us, Emily, Mark, myself, and a volunteer named Kevin, set out into the night. The forest was cloaked in darkness, the moonlight barely piercing the thick canopy above. Our flashlights cast narrow beams that danced among the trees, creating eerie shadows. We decided to split into 2 groups to cover more ground. Emily and Kevin headed toward the east side, where Mark had heard the scream, while Mark and I retraced my earlier path along North Ridge Trail. As we moved deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew heavier. The usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife were absent. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. "Do you think it's an animal attack?" Mark whispered, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I replied, "but we need to find them quickly." We came upon the spot where I'd found the backpack. It remained undisturbed. Mark examined it closely. These tears looked like they were made by something sharp, but not a knife. Claws, maybe. I shone my flashlight around the area, looking for any additional clues. A glint caught my eye, a small silver necklace tangled in a bush. I picked it up, noticing a locket attached. "This might belong to Jessica," I said, opening the locket to reveal a tiny photo of a young woman. A rustling sound nearby made us both snap to attention. "Who's there?" Mark called out. A figure stumbled into the edge of our light, a man disheveled and wide-eyed with fear. "Help me," he gasped. "It's out there." We rushed to his side. "Calm down," I said. "What's your name?" "David," he stammered. "We were hiking. Something attacked us." "Where are the others?" Mark asked urgently. "Gone. Taken," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "It came out of nowhere. A creature, not human, not animal." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "We need to get back to the station." A blood-curdling howl echoed through the trees, freezing us in place. It was a sound of primal fury, unlike anything I'd ever heard. "Run!" David screamed. We didn't need to be told twice. Supporting David between us, Mark and I raced back along the trail. The sound of heavy footsteps and snapping branches pursued us, closing in rapidly. "Over here!" Emily's voice called out from ahead. She and Kevin emerged from a side path, their faces mirroring our panic. "No time! Go!" I shouted. We burst into a clearing and the station lights flickered in the distance. Behind us, the creature's roar shook the very ground. David stumbled, pulling us down with him. "Leave me," he cried. "It's me it wants." "Not a chance," Mark grunted, hauling him back up. As we reached the station, Emily slammed the heavy door shut behind us, bolting it securely. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Kevin panted. David huddled in a corner, trembling uncontrollably. "It's the Wendigo," he whispered. "A monster of the old legends. It feeds on humans, mimics voices to lure its prey." I looked at Emily and Mark. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss his claims, but the evidence was mounting. "Whether it's a legend or not, something is out there hunting people," I said grimly, "and we need to stop it." The atmosphere inside the ranger station was thick with fear and uncertainty. The walls, once a symbol of safety, now felt like a flimsy barrier against the unknown terror lurking outside. We gathered around the old wooden table in the center of the room, maps and equipment strewn about. Emily took a deep breath, her voice steadying. "We need to contact the authorities and get backup. Whatever this thing is, we're not equipped to handle it alone." I nodded, reaching for the radio. "This is Ranger Thomas calling base. We have an emergency situation at Redwood Station. Multiple missing persons and an unknown hostile entity. Request immediate assistance. Over." Static crackled in response. No signal. "Damn it," Mark cursed. "The radios are jammed." Kevin pulled out his cell phone, his face falling as he stared at the screen. "No service here either." "It's the area," Emily said thoughtfully. "The dense forest always interferes with signals, but we have a satellite phone in the equipment room." We hurried to retrieve it. Emily dialed the emergency number, but the line was filled with static and garbled voices. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" she shouted. A faint reply came through. "This is Ranger Base. Repeat your message." Relief washed over us. "We need immediate assistance at Redwood Station," Emily repeated. "Unknown creature attacking hikers. Multiple casualties. Send help." The reply was distorted. "Copy. Assistance en route. Hold tight." The line went dead. At least they got the message, I said, but it could take hours for them to arrive. David looked up from his corner, his eyes hollow. We don't have hours. It hunts swiftly, especially at night. Then we need to fortify this place, Mark declared. Make sure it can't get in. We set to work, barricading doors and windows with furniture and anything else we could find. Emily organized the emergency supplies. Flares, first aid kits, and a couple of old hunting rifles kept for wildlife emergencies. As we worked, David began to speak in a low voice. The Wendigo is a spirit of insatiable hunger. It was once human but became a monster through cannibalism and dark rituals. It can mimic voices, lure you into traps. How do you know all this? I asked. He hesitated. I'm a folklore professor. I came here researching local legends with my students. I didn't believe it was real. Kevin swallowed hard. If it's a spirit, how do we fight it? Fire, David replied. In the stories, fire can purify and destroy it. Emily laid out the flares and gasoline cans used for controlled burns. Then we'll use fire. A sudden thud shook the front door, followed by a scraping sound. We froze. It's here, Mark whispered. The creature began to circle the station, its heavy footsteps echoing ominously. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, I caught a glimpse of it. A towering figure, emaciated with ash-gray skin stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its antlers branched out like twisted trees. It let out a chilling howl, a sound that pierced straight to the soul. Get ready, Emily instructed, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She handed out the rifles and flares. The creature slammed against the door, the wood splintering under the impact. We backed away, forming a defensive line. Come out, a voice called from outside. It sounded like a child crying. Help me, please. Don't listen, David warned. It's trying to trick us. Kevin's face paled. That's my sister's voice. He moved toward the door, but Mark grabbed him. It's not real. The creature bellowed in frustration, pounding harder. The door began to give way. On my signal, we lighted up, Emily directed. The door burst open, and the Wendigo loomed in the entrance, its eyes locking onto us. Without hesitation, Emily fired a flare directly at it. The flare struck its chest, erupting in flames. The creature shrieked, a sound that made my blood run cold. It stumbled back, thrashing wildly as the fire consumed it. Did we get it? Kevin asked, hope flickering in his voice. The flames subsided, revealing an empty doorway. The creature was gone. Stay alert, I cautioned. It might not be over. An eerie silence settled. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly a window shattered as the Wendigo crashed through from the side, its body still smoldering. It moved with terrifying speed, swiping at Kevin with elongated claws. He cried out as he was thrown against the wall, blood staining his shirt. Kevin! Emily screamed. We opened fire, bullets tearing into the creature, but it seemed unfazed. David grabbed another flare, igniting it before thrusting it into the Wendigo's back. It roared, spinning around to face him. With a swift motion, it slashed at David, who fell to the floor. Rage and fear propelled me forward. I grabbed a gasoline can, dousing the creature as Mark lit a match, tossing it onto the beast. Flames engulfed the Wendigo once more. This time it staggered, its form flickering like a fading shadow. With a final anguished howl, it collapsed and dissolved into ash. The silence that followed was deafening. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air. We stood there, weapons still raised, unsure if the nightmare was truly over. Emily rushed to Kevin's side, applying pressure to his wound. Stay with us, she urged. I knelt beside David. His injuries were severe. Thank you, he whispered weakly. You did it. Save your strength, I told him. Sirens echoed in the distance, the backup we'd been waiting for. Relief washed over me. Emergency services arrived, and the scene became a flurry of activity. Paramedics attended to Kevin and David, while officers took our statements. As dawn broke, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Birds began to sing, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. An officer approached us. We've searched the area but found no trace of the creature you described. It's gone, I said. We destroyed it. He gave a skeptical nod. We'll file the report, but you might want to get some rest. Emily and I exchanged a weary glance. We knew what we had experienced was real, even if others doubted. In the days that followed, the events weighed heavily on us. Kevin recovered from his injuries, but the trauma lingered. David remained hospitalized, his condition stable but requiring time to heal. The park was temporarily closed pending an investigation. Officially, the attacks were attributed to a rogue bear, but we knew the truth. One evening, Emily and I sat on the porch of the ranger station, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you think it's truly over?" she asked softly. I sighed. "I hope so." Suddenly we heard the familiar inhuman screech off in the distance. It was back. Me, Emily, and the other rangers are going in a few hours to hunt that thing before it hurts anyone else. I'm writing this down to warn others in case we don't make it. Wish us luck. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the dense forest as 6 friends navigated the winding dirt road leading to their campsite. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Laughter echoed between the trees as stories and jokes bounced from one friend to another. There was Alex, the adventurous spirit who had organized the trip. Maya, whose laugh could lighten any mood. Ben, always the skeptic but loyal to a fault. Lily, the quiet observer with a sketchbook in hand. Noah, the life of the party. And Emma, whose curiosity often led them into new escapades. "Are we there yet?" Ben groaned, adjusting his backpack. "My feet are killing me." "Just a bit further," Alex called back, his compass in hand. "Trust me, this spot is worth it." Maya nudged Ben playfully. "Come on, city boy. A little nature won't hurt you." They finally arrived at a clearing beside a tranquil lake, its surface reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. The group set up their tents, and soon a campfire crackled in the center, casting dancing shadows among them. As night fell, they gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The conversation shifted to local legends, and Noah leaned in with a grin. "Have you guys heard about the phantom camper?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like one of your made-up tales." "No, seriously," Noah insisted. "They say a camper went missing here years ago. Some believe he's still wandering these woods looking for unsuspecting groups to join." Lily shivered. "Thanks for that, Noah. Just what I needed to hear before bed." Alex laughed. "Don't worry, Lily. Ghosts aren't real. Besides, we're probably the only ones out here for miles." From the darkness beyond the firelight, a twig snapped. The friends fell silent, ears straining. "Probably just an animal," Maya said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Or the phantom camper," Ben teased, earning a glare from Lily. They decided to call it a night. One by one, they retreated to their tents. The forest settled into quietude, the only sounds being the gentle lapping of the lake and the rustling leaves. In the middle of the night, Emma awoke to the sound of footsteps outside her tent. She held her breath, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. She peeked through the small gap in her tent flap, but saw nothing in the darkness. "Must be my imagination," she whispered, lying back down. Eventually, sleep reclaimed her. Morning arrived with the chorus of birds. The group gathered for breakfast, but an unspoken tension hung in the air. "Did anyone else hear something last night?" Emma finally asked. Ben nodded. "Yeah, footsteps. I thought one of you was up." They exchanged uneasy glances. Alex tried to lighten the mood. "Probably just a deer. Let's not let it ruin our day." They spent the morning hiking, the canopy above filtering sunlight into a mosaic on the forest floor. As they ventured deeper, they stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. "Whoa, check this out," Noah exclaimed, pushing open the creaky door. Inside, dust motes floated in the shafts of light. Old furniture lay in disarray, and the walls were adorned with faded photographs. "This is so cool," Maya said, snapping pictures with her phone. Lily picked up a torn piece of fabric from the floor. "Guys, maybe we should head back. This place gives me the creeps." "Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" Alex teased. As they explored, Emma found a journal tucked under a floorboard. She opened it, revealing pages filled with frantic handwriting. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "I hear them at night, voices in the dark. They want me to join them, but I must resist." A chill settled over the group. "Okay, that's enough," Ben said firmly. "Let's go." They returned to their campsite, the discovery casting a shadow over their spirits. That evening they sat around the fire in subdued conversation. "Maybe Noah's story wasn't just a story," Lily whispered. "Don't start," Alex warned. "It's just an old cabin. Someone's abandoned journal." But as the night deepened, the feeling of being watched grew undeniable. The snap of branches and rustle of leaves seemed to circle their camp. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. The friends jumped to their feet, hearts pounding. "Whoa, sorry, didn't mean to startle you," the stranger said, hands raised. He was a man in his late 20s with unkempt hair and a friendly smile. "Name's Jake. I was hiking nearby and saw your fire. Mind if I join you?" They exchanged glances. Alex stepped forward. "Sure, no problem." Jake sat down, warming his hands by the fire. "It's rare to see other campers out here." "Yeah, we wanted to get away for a bit," Maya replied cautiously. As the night wore on, Jake shared tales of his travels. He was charming and seemed harmless, but something about him unsettled Emma. His eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't place. Eventually, they all retired to their tents, Jake setting up his nearby. The forest once again fell silent. In the dead of night, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. The scream jolted everyone awake. Alex stumbled out of his tent, flashlight in hand. "Who was that?" he shouted, panic seeping into his voice. Emma emerged next, her face pale. It sounded like Lily. They rushed to Lily's tent only to find it empty. Her sleeping bag was torn and her belongings were scattered. No, this can't be happening," Maya whispered, eyes wide with fear. Ben grabbed Alex's arm. "We need to find her now." Jake appeared behind them, concern etched on his face. "What happened?" "Lily's missing," Emma replied tersely. "We heard her scream." Jake nodded solemnly. "We should spread out and look for her." "No," Alex countered. "We stick together. We don't know what's out there." They formed a tight group, calling out Lily's name as they ventured into the woods. The beams of their flashlights pierced the darkness, but the forest seemed to swallow their voices. After an hour of fruitless searching, Noah sighed heavily. "This is useless. Maybe we should go back and wait. She might return on her own." Reluctantly, they headed back to the campsite. The fire had died down to embers, casting eerie shadows. "She wouldn't just run off," Ben muttered. "Something's wrong." Maya sat down, her hands trembling. "First the footsteps, now this. I think we're being watched." Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her. At first light, we'll cover more ground." The group huddled close that night, sleep eluding them. When dawn broke, there was still no sign of Lily. Alex took charge. "Emma, you and Maya stay here in case she comes back. The rest of us will search the area again." As they prepared to leave, Emma pulled Alex aside. "Be careful. I have a bad feeling about Jake." Alex frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Something just feels off." "I'll keep an eye on him," Alex promised. The search party delved deeper into the forest. Hours passed with no trace of Lily. Tension mounted between them. "Maybe we should head back," Ben suggested. "We might be putting ourselves in danger." Jake stepped forward. "You can go back if you want. I'm not giving up." Alex watched Jake carefully. "Ben's right. We should regroup." Jake's expression darkened. "Fine. Waste more time." Back at the campsite, Emma and Maya sat in uneasy silence. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the bushes. Maya grabbed a stick, holding it defensively. "Who's there?" A small rabbit darted out and they exhaled in relief. "This place is getting to me," Maya admitted. Emma nodded. "We just need to stay calm." As the sun began to set, the others returned, exhaustion etched on their faces. "Any luck?" Emma asked. Alex shook his head. "Nothing." They gathered around the fire, the weight of the situation bearing down on them. "We need to make a decision," Ben said gravely. "Either we hike back to civilization and get help or stay and keep searching." "We can't just leave her out here," Noah argued. "But what if something happens to us?" Maya countered. Jake stirred the fire with a stick. "Splitting up would be a mistake." Alex looked around the circle. "I think we should all stick together and head back in the morning." Agreements murmured around the group. They settled in for another restless night. In the early hours, Emma awoke to the sound of muffled voices. She quietly unzipped her tent and peeked out. She saw Jake and Alex arguing heatedly near the lake. "You've been acting strange since you got here," Alex accused. Jake's face was shadowed. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "Maybe you do. Lily goes missing right after you show up." Jake took a step closer. "Are you implying something?" Emma's heart pounded. She retreated into her tent, careful not to make a sound. The next morning, Alex was nowhere to be found. Panic surged through the group. "This can't be happening," Ben stammered. Emma confronted Jake. "What did you do to Alex?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you two arguing last night." Jake raised his hands defensively. "We had a disagreement, but I didn't do anything to him." Noah stepped between them. "We need to stay calm and figure this out." Maya's voice shook. "People are disappearing one by one. We need to leave. Now." Ben nodded. "I agree. Let's pack up and get out of here." They hastily gathered their gear, but as they prepared to leave, they noticed that their compass and map were missing. "How is this possible?" Emma cried. "We can't navigate without them." Jake frowned. "Someone doesn't want us to leave." Suspicion hung thick in the air. "Maybe it's you," Ben snapped. "You show up and everything goes wrong." Jake glared at him. "I lost friends too." "Enough," Noah shouted. "Pointing fingers won't help." They decided to follow the trail they came in on, hoping it would lead them back. As they trekked through the forest, an uneasy silence settled over them. Hours passed with no sign of the road. "This doesn't make sense," Maya said, her voice edged with hysteria. "We should have reached the road by now." "It's like we're going in circles," Emma observed. Jake stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" They listened. Faint whispers seemed to emanate from the trees, indiscernible but chilling. Ben shook his head. "This is madness." Suddenly, Noah screamed and fell to the ground, clutching his leg. A crude trap had snapped around his ankle, blood seeping through his fingers. "Oh my God!" Emma exclaimed, rushing to his side. Jake examined the trap. "It's a snare. Someone set this deliberately." Maya looked around frantically. "We have to get out of here." They freed Noah from the trap, but he couldn't walk unassisted. "Leave me," he groaned. "You need to save yourselves." "We're not leaving you," Ben insisted, helping him up. As dusk approached, they realized they wouldn't make it out before dark. "We need to find shelter," Jake suggested. "Continuing in the dark is too dangerous." Reluctantly, they agreed and found a rocky outcrop to take refuge under. Emma tended to Noah's wound as best she could. "Just hang in there." Maya sat close, her eyes darting at every sound. "Do you think Lily and Alex are—" Emma didn't answer, but the unspoken fear hung between them. Jake stood guard at the entrance. Ben approached him quietly. "I don't trust you." Jake sighed. "Believe me or not, I'm trying to help." "Then tell me who you really are," Ben demanded. Jake met his gaze. "I'm just a traveler who got caught up in this nightmare." Before Ben could respond, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. "Who's there?" Jake called out. The figure stepped into the fading light. It was Lily. Relief and confusion washed over them. "Lily!" Emma cried. "Where have you been?" Lily's expression was blank. "I got lost." Maya approached her cautiously. Are you okay? Lily nodded slowly. Yes, we should go deeper into the woods. It's safer. Alarm bells rang in Emma's mind. What? No, we're trying to get out. Lily's eyes flickered toward Jake. Trust me. Ben stepped back. Something's wrong. Before they could react, Lily pulled out a jagged piece of metal and lunged at Ben. Jake intercepted her, wresting the makeshift weapon from her hand. Run! He shouted to the others. Chaos erupted as they scattered into the forest. Emma grabbed Maya's hand, pulling her along. Behind them, Noah struggled to keep up, limping badly. Branches whipped past as they ran blindly. Emma could hear footsteps gaining on them. We have to hide, she panted. They ducked behind a fallen tree, trying to silence their ragged breaths. What happened to Lily? Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Emma replied, her mind racing. But that wasn't her. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Emma peeked over the log and saw Jake. Emma, Maya, it's me, he called softly. Maya started to stand, but Emma pulled her back. Wait. Jake scanned the area, his expression unreadable. We need to stick together. Emma hesitated. Was he friend or foe? Behind them, a twig snapped. They spun around to see Ben, his face pale. Thank God, he breathed. I thought I'd lost you. They regrouped cautiously. Where's Noah? Emma asked. Ben shook his head. I don't know. We got separated. Maya hugged herself tightly. We can't keep running like this. Jake approached slowly. Listen, I know you don't trust me, but we have to work together. Emma met his eyes. If you know anything about what's happening, now's the time to tell us. He took a deep breath. I came out here because people have been disappearing in these woods. I didn't tell you everything because I didn't want to scare you. Ben scowled. Well, that worked out great. Jake continued. There's something in this forest, something that can mimic us. Maya's eyes widened. You mean like a shapeshifter? Call it what you want, Jake said, but it takes on the appearance of its victims. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. So that wasn't Lily? No, Jake confirmed, and it won't stop until it gets all of us. The revelation hung heavy in the air, each of them grappling with the horrifying possibility that the forest harbored a malevolent entity capable of impersonation. Ben ran a hand through his hair, his voice strained. So any one of us could be. Jake shook his head. I think it can only mimic those it's taken, but we can't be sure. Maya's eyes darted between them. Then how do we know you're not the imposter? Jake met her gaze steadily. You don't, but right now trust is all we have. Emma intervened. Arguing won't help us. We need a plan. A rustling noise interrupted them. They froze, listening intently. From the shadows, Noah stumbled forward, his face contorted in pain. Help me, he groaned, collapsing to his knees. Emma rushed toward him, but Jake grabbed her arm. Wait, she pulled free. He's hurt. Jake stepped in front of her. We can't be sure it's really him. Noah looked up, desperation in his eyes. What are you talking about? It's me. Ben moved closer, scrutinizing Noah. Prove it. Tell us something only Noah would know. Noah grimaced. This is ridiculous. Emma hesitated. On our last trip, what prank did you pull on Alex? Noah's eyes flickered. I don't remember. I'm in pain here, Maya whispered. Noah would never forget that. He bragged about it for weeks. Jake tightened his grip on his makeshift spear. It's not him. Suddenly, Noah's expression shifted to a sinister smile. Clever. In an instant, he lunged at them, but Jake was quicker, thrusting the spear forward. The figure recoiled with an otherworldly shriek, retreating into the darkness. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. What was that? Jake lowered his weapon. That's what took your friends. Ben swallowed hard. We can't stay here. They moved cautiously through the forest, sticking close together. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like twisted arms. Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. How do we fight something like that? Jake glanced back at her. It seems to avoid its own reflection. When I held up the blade, it recoiled. Emma thought for a moment. Mirrors. Does anyone have anything reflective? Ben pulled out his phone. The screen's cracked, but it might work. Jake nodded. It's worth a try. Keep it handy. As they pressed on, the forest grew denser, the path obscured by undergrowth. The air was thick with mist, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step. Ben shivered. This doesn't feel right. Are we even going the right way? Emma checked her watch, though it offered no comfort. We should have reached the edge of the forest by now. Jake's expression was grim. The forest is playing tricks on us. Maya's eyes filled with tears. I can't do this anymore. Emma put an arm around her. We have to keep moving. They came upon a fork in the path. 2 trails stretched before them, each as uninviting as the other. Which way? Ben asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. Before anyone could answer, a voice echoed from the left path. Help! Over here! Emma's blood ran cold. That's Alex. Maya stepped forward. We have to go to him. Jake blocked her path. No, it's trying to lure us. Ben shook his head. But what if it's really him? Emma considered their options. We can't ignore it. If there's a chance he's alive. Jake sighed. All right, but we proceed with caution. They followed the voice, which continued to call out intermittently. The path led them to a clearing dominated by a massive oak tree. At its base sat Alex, his clothes torn and face bruised. Thank God you found me, he rasped. Emma approached slowly. Alex, is it really you? He looked up, eyes filled with relief. Yes, I've been wandering for hours. Jake held up the reflective blade. Hold this. Alex eyed it warily. What's that for? Just do it, Jake insisted. Alex hesitated but took the blade. His reflection stared back at him and nothing happened. Ben exhaled. It's him. They gathered around, bombarding him with questions. Where did you go? What happened to you? Alex rubbed his temples. After our argument, I went for a walk to clear my head. Next thing I know, something attacked me. I've been trying to find my way back ever since. Maya hugged him tightly. We're just glad you're okay. Jake remained cautious. Did you see Lily? Alex shook his head. No, is she still missing? Emma nodded solemnly. Jake glanced around. We should keep moving. They resumed their journey, but the group's energy was waning. The forest seemed endless, each turn leading them deeper. Night began to fall once more, the shadows lengthening. Ben stumbled over a root, cursing under his breath. We're getting nowhere. Emma looked up through the canopy. The stars are coming out. Maybe we can navigate using them. Jake agreed. Good idea. As they paused to get their bearings, a low humming sound filled the air. Maya clutched Emma's arm. What's that? The humming grew louder, more discordant. From the trees, shapes began to emerge, twisted, shadowy figures that shifted and contorted. Jake brandished his spear. Stay back! The figures surrounded them, their forms flickering between familiar faces. Lily, Noah, even versions of themselves. Emma's head spun. This can't be real. Alex stepped forward, his voice steady. They're trying to confuse us. One of the figures, wearing Lily's face, reached out. Join us, it whispered. Maya covered her ears. Make it stop, Jake shouted. Use the reflections. They held up their phones, any reflective surface they could find. The figures recoiled, their forms destabilizing. Ben's phone slipped from his grasp, the screen shattering completely. A figure lunged at him, and he cried out as it grabbed his arm. Without thinking, Emma swung her mirror pendant toward the creature. It hissed and released Ben, retreating into the shadows. Thanks, Ben gasped. The humming subsided, and the forest grew still once more. Jake's eyes darted around. We need to move, now. They hurried along the path, adrenaline fueling their steps. The trees began to thin, and soon they could see the faint glow of dawn on the horizon. We're almost out, Maya exclaimed. Relief washed over them as they broke through the tree line, stumbling onto a familiar dirt road. Ben laughed incredulously. We made it. But Jake remained wary. We can't let our guard down yet. They followed the road until they reached the spot where they'd parked their cars. The vehicles stood untouched, a beacon of normalcy in the chaos they'd endured. As they approached, a figure stepped out from behind one of the cars, Noah. He waved weakly. Guys, I've been waiting for you. Emma's heart leaped. Noah, you're alive. They rushed toward him, but Jake held up a hand. Wait. Noah frowned. What's wrong? Jake eyed him suspiciously. Prove it's really you. Noah sighed. Come on, Jake, isn't this a bit much? Emma spoke softly. We have to be sure. Noah nodded, understanding. All right, ask me something only I would know. Maya thought for a moment. When we first met, what did you say to me? Noah smiled. I told you that your laugh was contagious. Maya relaxed. It's him. Jake wasn't convinced. Hold this, he said, offering the reflective blade. Noah took it without hesitation, his reflection clear in the metal. Satisfied? Jake nodded slowly. Okay. They piled into the cars, eager to leave the nightmare behind. As they drove away, Emma looked back at the forest, its dark silhouette shrinking in the distance. Do you think it's over? She asked quietly. Jake, driving the lead car, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. For now. They reached the nearest town and went straight to the authorities, recounting their harrowing experience. Search parties were dispatched to find Lily, but no trace of her was discovered. Days turned into weeks. The group tried to return to their normal lives, but the events in the forest haunted them. One evening, Emma received a call from Ben. Have you seen the news? He asked, his voice tense. She turned on the TV to a breaking news report. Several hikers had gone missing in the same forest. Her stomach churned. It's happening again. They decided to meet at a local cafe to discuss what they could do. Maya was already there when Emma arrived, her eyes red from tears. I can't shake the feeling that we left something unfinished. Ben nodded. People are in danger because we didn't stop it. Jake entered, his expression determined. Then we have to go back. Emma looked at him in disbelief. Are you serious? He met her gaze. We know what we're dealing with now. Maybe we can find a way to stop it. Noah leaned forward. But how? We barely escaped with our lives. Jake pulled out a worn book from his bag. I've been doing some research. There's lore about entities like this, ways to trap them. Maya shook her head. Going back there is suicide. Ben placed a hand on her shoulder. If we don't, more people will disappear. Maybe worse. Emma took a deep breath. I'm in. One by one, they agreed. The decision weighed heavily on them, but they couldn't ignore the responsibility they felt. They spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies, studying the lore, and devising a plan. On the morning of their departure, Emma stood outside the entrance to the forest, a sense of déjà vu washing over her. Jake adjusted his backpack. Everyone ready? They nodded, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. As they ventured back into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around them, the familiar, oppressive atmosphere returning. They reached the clearing where they'd last encountered the entity. Jake set down his pack. According to the texts, we need to create a binding circle. They worked quickly, drawing symbols on the ground and placing reflective objects around the perimeter. As dusk approached, the forest grew restless. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, and whispers floated on the breeze. Maya lit the last candle. Now what? Jake held up an old talisman. We wait. The air grew colder, and a dense fog rolled in. From the mist, figures emerged, Lily looking just as she did the last time they saw her. She stepped toward them, her voice soft. Why did you leave me? Emma's eyes filled with tears. It's not her. Lily's face twisted into a malicious grin. You can't stop us. Other figures appeared, surrounding the circle. The group held their ground, reciting the incantation Jake had found. The entities hissed and writhed, their forms flickering between shapes. The symbols on the ground began to glow, and a barrier of light enveloped the circle. Ben's voice wavered as he continued the chant. "Is it working?" The entities screamed, a piercing sound that shook the very ground beneath them. Jake shouted over the noise, "Don't stop!" The light intensified, and one by one the figures dissolved into the mist. Finally silence fell. They looked around cautiously. The oppressive feeling had lifted, and the forest seemed normal. Maya sank to the ground. "Did we do it?" Jake nodded slowly. "I think so." Emma gazed into the darkness where Lily's figure had stood. "I hope you're at peace now." They gathered their things and made their way out of the forest as the first light of dawn touched the sky. Back in town, news spread of their actions. The disappearances ceased, and life slowly returned to normal. Months later, the group met again, this time at a park bathed in sunlight. Ben raised a glass to friends, both lost and found. They clinked their glasses, a solemn toast to the journey they'd shared. Emma looked around at their faces, tired but hopeful. "We faced our fears and made it through, together." Jake smiled faintly. "Sometimes the only way out is through." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their experiences balanced by the strength of their bond. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, they knew that while the memories would never fade, neither would their resilience. The forest kept its secrets, but they had reclaimed their lives. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dense forest as I navigated the winding trail. Autumn had painted the leaves in hues of amber and crimson, and the crisp air carried the earthy scent of fallen foliage. This solo camping trip was meant to be a retreat, a chance to disconnect from the relentless pace of city life and find solace in nature's embrace. I had chosen a remote area in the national forest miles away from the nearest town. The isolation was intentional. I craved silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the songs of unseen birds. As I hiked deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded, replaced by the symphony of the wild. After several hours, I found the perfect spot, a small clearing beside a tranquil stream, framed by towering oaks and maples. Setting down my backpack, I began to pitch my tent, the familiar motions soothing in their simplicity. The sun dipped below the horizon as I kindled a small fire, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows among the trees. I sat by the fire, warming my hands and watching the stars emerge in the inky sky. The isolation felt liberating, the weight of daily stresses lifting as I absorbed the serenity around me. I cooked a simple meal over the fire and ate slowly, savoring each bite as the nocturnal chorus of insects and frogs filled the air. As the night deepened, a sense of unease crept in, a subtle prickling at the back of my neck. I dismissed it as the unfamiliarity of sleeping alone in the wilderness. Extinguishing the fire, I retreated into my tent, zipping it securely behind me. Wrapped in my sleeping bag, I listened to the gentle babble of the stream, letting its rhythm lull me toward sleep. A snap of a twig jolted me awake. I lay still, heart pounding, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. But beneath it all was something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching softly on the forest floor. I told myself it was just a deer or some other harmless creature. Yet the footsteps grew closer, pausing intermittently as if whoever or whatever was out there was listening too. I held my breath, gripping the edge of my sleeping bag. Suddenly silence. The footsteps stopped, and the night seemed to hold its breath with me. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time had lost its meaning. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I drifted into a restless sleep. Morning light filtered through the tent fabric, and the sounds of the forest had returned to their daytime melodies. I emerged cautiously, half expecting to find tracks or signs of an intruder, but the ground revealed nothing unusual. Shaking off the night's anxiety, I decided to explore the area, mapping out the surroundings and gathering firewood for the coming night. The day passed peacefully. I hiked along the stream, collected interesting stones, and even spotted a family of deer grazing in a meadow. By evening, I felt rejuvenated, the previous night's disturbance fading into a mere blip in an otherwise perfect day. As dusk settled, I prepared another fire, its warmth and light providing comfort against the encroaching darkness. I wrote in my journal, capturing thoughts and sketches of the landscape. The tranquility was profound, but as the stars emerged once more, that nagging unease returned. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement between the trees, a flicker of shadow against shadow. I stood up, peering into the darkness, but saw nothing. Telling myself it was just my imagination, I settled back down. Then a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind. My name. It sounded like my name. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood on end as I scanned the darkness surrounding the campfire. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice betraying a tremor. Silence. Only the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the forest responded. I laughed nervously, chastising myself for being spooked. It was probably just the wind rustling through the trees. Deciding to turn in early, I doused the fire and retreated into my tent. I made sure everything was secured and settled into my sleeping bag, but sleep eluded me. Every rustle, every creak seemed amplified in the darkness. Then the footsteps returned, closer this time, circling the tent slowly. I could hear the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs under deliberate steps. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain whoever was outside could hear it. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite the quiver in my voice. No response. The footsteps stopped directly outside the tent flap. I stared at the zipper, half expecting it to start moving. The silence was suffocating. Suddenly the side of the tent bowed inward, as if someone or something was pressing a hand against it. I stifled a scream, scrambling backward until I was pressed against the opposite wall of the tent. The pressure remained for a moment, then slowly moved along the side, tracing a path around the tent. My mind raced. Should I confront it, stay silent, run? I grabbed my flashlight and with a surge of adrenaline unzipped the tent in one swift motion, shining the beam into the night. The light pierced the darkness, illuminating nothing. No figure, no animal, just the swaying branches and the quiet woods. I stepped out cautiously, sweeping the flashlight in all directions. The forest remained indifferent, offering no clues. My breath formed clouds in the cool air as I listened intently. Then from behind me, a whisper, "Leave." I spun around, but again saw nothing. Panic surged through me. Deciding I had had enough, I hastily gathered my essentials, stuffing them into my backpack. The rest of the gear could be retrieved later. With the flashlight guiding my path, I started back toward the trail, eager to put distance between me and whatever was out there. The forest, once welcoming, now felt oppressive, the trees like silent sentinels watching my every move. As I hurried along the barely visible path, the footsteps resumed behind me, matched to my pace, quickening when I quickened, slowing when I slowed. Fear propelled me forward, branches whipping against my face, as I abandoned the trail in favor of a more direct route back to my car. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, indistinct but urgent. Branches snapped underfoot as I pushed onward, the beam of my flashlight bobbing erratically with each hurried step. The whispers had subsided, but an oppressive silence now filled the air, broken only by the pounding of my heart. My mind raced, torn between the urge to look back and the fear of what I might see if I did. After what felt like an eternity, the dense forest began to thin. Relief washed over me at the sight of a familiar landmark, a twisted oak I had noted on my hike in. I was on the right path. Just a little further and I'd reach the parking area where my car awaited. A sudden chill swept through the air, far colder than the autumn night should have been. My breath formed dense clouds as I shivered uncontrollably. The flashlight flickered, and I smacked it against my palm, willing it to stay lit. Then ahead on the path, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall and indistinct, it stood motionless, blocking my way. I halted, gripping the flashlight tightly as I directed its beam toward the figure. The light revealed nothing. The path was empty. A hallucination? Panic playing tricks on my senses? I didn't wait to find out. Summoning the last of my strength, I broke into a sprint, dodging low-hanging branches and leaping over roots that seemed to grasp at my ankles. The trees gave way to the gravel lot where my car was parked, a solitary vehicle under the pale glow of the moon. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them in my haste. As I bent to retrieve them, a soft whisper brushed against my ear. "You can't escape." I spun around, but the space behind me was empty. Hands shaking, I unlocked the car, threw my backpack onto the passenger seat, and jumped in. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, gravel spraying behind me. The road was a dark ribbon winding through the forest. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or a shadowy figure pursuing me. The radio sputtered to life unexpectedly, static hissing before a distorted voice emerged. "Why are you leaving?" I stabbed at the power button, but the radio wouldn't turn off. The voice continued, overlapping whispers echoing through the car. Panic surged as the headlights began to flicker, the engine sputtering as if struggling against an unseen force. "Stop," I shouted, more to myself than anything else. The car lurched forward as the engine regained power, the radio falling silent. I didn't dare slow down until I reached the outskirts of the nearest town. Pulling into a well-lit gas station, I parked and took several deep breaths, my hands still trembling. The fluorescent lights and the hum of civilization provided a stark contrast to the terror I had just fled. I considered calling someone, anyone, but felt foolish. What would I say? That I was chased out of the woods by whispers and shadows? Deciding to find a motel for the night, I drove into town. The motel clerk barely looked up as I checked in, handing me a key with a room number scrawled on a sticky note. The room was modest but clean, and I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion overtaking me. Sleep came fitfully, filled with nightmares of dark forests and unseen pursuers. I awoke in the early hours of the morning, the first rays of sunlight peeking through the thin curtains. The events of the night before felt surreal, but the lingering dread told me it had been all too real. Determined to put distance between myself and that place, I decided to head home immediately. As I packed up, I noticed something odd. The soles of my boots were caked with mud and leaves, but among them was a scrap of cloth. Pulling it free, I realized it was a piece of fabric, ancient-looking and frayed, with symbols embroidered in thread that shimmered unnaturally. A chill ran down my spine. Had this caught on my boots during my frantic escape? Or had something, placed it there? I wrapped it in a plastic bag and stuffed it deep into my backpack, unwilling to touch it any longer. The drive home was uneventful, the familiar sights of highways and city streets gradually easing my attention. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd almost convinced myself that exhaustion and overactive imagination had gotten the better of me. Over the next few days, life returned to normal. Work was a welcome distraction, and I avoided discussing the trip with friends and colleagues. Yet at night, the unease returned. Shadows in my apartment seemed darker, noises more pronounced. One evening, as I sorted through my camping gear to store it away, I came across the plastic bag containing the strange fabric. Curiosity overpowered my apprehension. I retrieved it and laid it out on the kitchen table, examining the intricate symbols. They seemed to shift under the light, patterns rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. I decided to take a photo and post it on an online forum dedicated to folklore and the occult, hoping someone might identify the symbols. Within minutes, responses began to pour in. Most were dismissive or joking, but one caught my attention, a private message from a user named Elias. "Where did you find this?" the message read, I replied, vaguely mentioning I found it during a hike in a forested area. Elias responded almost immediately. "Listen carefully. You need to return it to where you found it. You've taken something that wasn't meant to leave that place." A sense of dread settled over me. I typed back, "What do you mean? It's just a piece of fabric." "No," came the reply. "It's a binding, a ward. By removing it, you've broken a seal. You must return it and perform a ritual to restore the balance." I stared at the screen, disbelief mingling with fear. This had to be a prank. "Assuming I believe you, what kind of ritual?" Elias sent a list of instructions, including items I would need and a specific location. A map coordinate alarmingly close to where I had camped. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, closing the laptop. Yet that night the whispers returned. As I lay in bed, the room grew cold. A faint voice echoed through the darkness. "You took it from us. Bring it back." I sat up, heart racing. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to coalesce, creeping along the walls toward me. Flicking on the bedside lamp dispelled them, but the sense of being watched remained. The next morning, sleep-deprived and desperate, I decided to contact Elias again. We arranged a video call, and I was surprised to see a middle-aged man with serious eyes and an air of sincerity. "You must act quickly," he urged. "The longer you wait, the stronger it becomes." "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated before replying. "An ancient spirit, bound to that forest long ago. The wards keep it contained, but if disturbed, it seeks to break free. It can attach itself to those who weaken the seals." I wanted to argue, to rationalize, but the experiences of the past days silenced my skepticism. "Fine, I'll do it. What do I need?" He guided me through the preparations. A list of herbs, a specific type of candle, and the necessity of returning to the exact spot where I found the fabric. That afternoon I gathered the required items and set out once more toward the forest. Each mile closer heightened my anxiety, but I was resolute. If performing this ritual would end the torment, I had to try. The sun hung low as I arrived at the edge of the forest. The once inviting trees now loomed menacingly, their branches like twisted fingers against the darkening sky. I parked the car and shouldered my backpack, double-checking that I had everything Elias had listed. Entering the forest, I followed the trail with deliberate steps, each crunch of leaves underfoot echoing in the stillness. The coordinates led me off the main path, deeper into an area overgrown and untamed. As dusk settled, I reached a clearing marked by a circle of ancient stones. The air was heavy here, the silence profound. I realized this must be the place where the ward had been laid. I set up the candles around the perimeter of the stone circle, their flames flickering weakly against a rising breeze. Placing the fabric scrap in the center, I sprinkled the herbs over it as instructed. Reading from the parchment Elias had provided, I recited the incantation, a language unfamiliar and guttural. The words felt thick on my tongue, the atmosphere around me growing denser with each syllable. The wind intensified, swirling leaves and debris within the circle. Shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed to writhe and stretch toward me. Fear clawed at my resolve, but I pressed on, raising my voice over the howling gusts. As I uttered the final words, a deafening silence fell. The wind ceased abruptly, the flames of the candles standing unnaturally still. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a whisper, gentler this time, echoed around me. "It is done." Relief washed over me. The oppressive weight lifted, and the forest seemed to exhale, the natural sounds of wildlife cautiously resuming. I gathered my belongings, leaving the fabric where it lay, and prepared to depart. As I turned to leave, a figure stepped out from behind a tree, a woman, ethereal and pale, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Thank you," she said softly. Startled, I stumbled backward. "Who are you?" she smiled sadly. "A guardian of this place, bound to ensure the seal remains intact. When you removed the ward, I could not intervene directly, but could only warn you." "The whispers, that was you?" She nodded. "I am sorry for the fear I caused. It was the only way to compel you to return." "Is it over?" I asked hesitantly. "For now," she replied. "But the seal is weakened. Others may disturb it again. The bindings are old and their power fades with time." An idea formed in my mind. Can it be restored permanently? Her gaze turned thoughtful. "Perhaps, but it would require a new guardian, a living one, to renew the wards and watch over this place." I hesitated. "What happens to the current guardian? My time here wanes. I was once like you, drawn in by forces I didn't understand. I chose to stay, to protect others from the darkness." The weight of her words settled on me. "You're asking me to take your place?" "It must be freely given," she said, "but know that your life will change. You will be bound to the forest, connected to its fate." I glanced around the clearing. The idea of spending my life tied to this place was daunting, yet a sense of responsibility tugged at me. If I walked away, the cycle might repeat, endangering others. "What if I refuse?" I asked. "Then I will remain until I fade completely. After that, the seal will break and the spirit will be unleashed upon the world." A heavy silence settled between us. Finally I spoke. "What must I do?" She extended her hand. "Accept the bond and I will pass my knowledge to you." I took a deep breath, then reached out to grasp her hand. A surge of energy coursed through me, memories, emotions, and ancient lore flooding my mind. Visions of the forest through the ages, the battles fought to contain the darkness, the rituals performed by those who came before. When I opened my eyes, the woman was gone. I stood alone in the clearing, but I no longer felt afraid. Instead, a profound connection to the forest pulsed within me. I could sense every tree, every creature, as if they were extensions of myself. Over the following days, I began to understand my new role. I tended to the wards, learning to weave protective barriers using the energy that now flowed through me. The whispers in the night transformed into songs, a chorus of the forest's ancient language. Occasionally, hikers would wander close, and I guided them away subtly, ensuring they remained on safe paths. The shadows that once threatened me became my allies, shifting to conceal the secrets of the woods from prying eyes. One evening, as I sat beneath the twisted oak, the same one I'd noted on my first trek, I felt a presence beside me. Turning, I saw Elias approaching, a knowing smile on his face. "I see you've embraced the calling," he said. "You knew this would happen," I replied, not accusingly, but with curiosity. He nodded. "I am a sentinel, like you now are. We are few, scattered across the world where such places exist." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Some journeys must be taken without foresight," he said gently. "You needed to make the choice freely." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the forest alive with the sounds of dusk. "Will it always be like this?" I asked. "Will the threat ever truly end?" "The balance is delicate," Elias admitted. "But as long as there are those willing to stand guard, we can keep the darkness at bay." I looked out over the trees, the canopy glowing with the last light of the setting sun. I never imagined my life would take this turn. "Few do," he chuckled. "But perhaps it's where you were always meant to be." As night settled in, Elias departed, leaving me with a sense of camaraderie and purpose. I returned to the heart of the forest, my senses attuned to its rhythms. The stars above shimmered brightly, and the whispers that once filled me with dread now brought solace. I had gone camping in the woods seeking solitude, an escape from the mundane. Instead, I found a destiny intertwined with the ancient spirit of the land. Something had been following me, but rather than a harbinger of doom, it was a call to a greater purpose. And so, under the watchful gaze of the moon, I embraced my role as guardian, knowing that while the shadows held their secrets, I was now a part of their story. A protector of the delicate veil between worlds. I will record my journey and leave this journal for future guardians, so when my time comes I will pass peacefully knowing my duty has been fulfilled and the future secured.